Welcome to the Dayton Unit NAACP monthly community meeting titled The Hamas-Israeli Conflict, Pathways to Peace. We're going to be engaged in conversation to educate the community on what's going on over in the Gaza Strip, but more importantly, how we as Americans can live together, united in peace, under one roof, and that's our roof of Ohio, in this case, by ways of Dayton, Ohio, into the Dayton region. And we want to show the world how we all can live in peace together. Let's be an example for those overseas. And we want to send our love and our regards to everybody who's been impacted. And know that our prayers are with both families. The person who's moderating this evening will be Reverend Religious Affairs Chair, Reverend Bernard D. Allen Jr. It's on you, Reverend Bernard. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Let's try that again. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
In a certain community, a house caught on fire, and as it burned, firefighters are called to put it out and make sure that all who were in it were rescued. One of the children who was rescued from the fire noticed that a month later, his parents were still bogged down, trying to figure out their next move. But they assured their children that the next move would be constructive, beneficial. One of their children's curiosity got the best of him. And he said, "Why is it a month later and we still have not found a new place to live?" And the parents said, "These things take time." He said, "Mom and Dad, be honest, did you have insurance?" They said, "Yes." They said, "In fact, that's what's taking so long." He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Son, everybody in the society has a role to play. The firefighter's job, our job, was to keep you all safe until the firefighters came. Firefighter's job was to put out the fire. The insurance company's job is to figure out what caused the fire." We're here tonight because we see a portion of our world ablaze, burning with deep-seated conflict, animosity, generational issues. It is not enough for us to just put it out. We must figure out what is causing the fire. And so tonight we have been graced, pun intended, with panelists who hopefully will be instruments of information to help us understand the cause of this concerning fire that is literally consuming these communities, both of which are part of God's wonderful creation. I would like for us to receive them in their own way, and they will each introduce themselves as we start by giving them each 5 minutes to introduce themselves and also explain to us in summary their perspective on what is causing this Thank you. We'll start with Mr. Houston.
Good evening, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yusuf Zain. I'm a Muslim American born and raised in Lebanon. I'm not actually a Palestinian, but born and raised in Lebanon. I came to the United States in 1980 to go to college. I was blessed by the fortune for my parents to be able to send me to the United States of America. And since then, my participation was to take care of myself, to do good for my parents, to be
Example.
to be respectful and proud of me. And luckily, I accomplished that. But since 1980 and moving on, I almost wrote an op-ed almost every year that I can remember. And that was my participation, fighting for the rights of the Lebanese people as well as our families in Palestine. Op-ed did not do it. So we were kind of people that like to write op-eds and then move on, thinking that hopefully peace will prevail at one point or another. There were many opportunities in the past, hoping that that would be a reality, but it didn't work out. And fast forward to 2016, I had a good reason to come out of my shell. And it wasn't because of my friends in the Jewish community. It was literally the previous president that we had. The fact that he bluntly attacked the Muslim community made me feel that it is time for me to move on and start defending who I am as a person. I was born and raised as a Muslim. My parents, both of them, were devout Muslims. I didn't follow their suit until 2016 when I started believing that it's time for us to defend every religion in this country, not necessarily the Christian, the Jewish, or the Muslim religion. So since 2016, I became more aware of my community. I have many of my friends sitting here from the Muslim faith, from the Jewish faith, that I'm so happy to have, and then also from the Methodist sect of the Christianity. I was so happy to find these friends. Those friends were the only thing I had since October 7th. October 7th wasn't easy. I slept late that night, but woke up on the news, and the first thing I did is receiving a call from the Peace Museum, since I am a member of the Peace Museum. And they said, why don't we come into the Peace Museum and do something up front, because we knew the consequences of the unfortunate attack that took place. October 8th, we had communications to both from the Peace Museum go out to the Jewish community leaders as well as the Muslim community leaders, inviting them to come to the Peace Museum as a safe place to start a dialogue, to prevent any further damage of our relationships in Dayton, Ohio. Forget what's happening in Gaza and Israel. We live in Dayton, Ohio, and unfortunately, it didn't happen. The communication went out on October 8th, to be exact, or 9th, and so far we're still hoping that we can both come together to celebrate and work together for a peaceful resolution. We can't force the combatants to like peace, but we can live in peace in our country, in our society. We need to love each other. The hate that's taking place against Muslim minority in this nation has to be completely deplored by every person of faith. But we're not getting that, unfortunately. We're not getting that, which is really sad to see that whatever an olive branch, which is very appropriate to say, we extend, we're faced by obstacles. No, it's too much to say that. It's too bad to say that. But you know what? I made many new Jewish friends because they feel like I feel. My heart is shattered. And I've been saying it's time to stop that. Grief is really causing many of us, Christians, Muslims, as well as Jewish faith, lots of hardship, mental agony. it's time to move on, and there is a chance in Dayton, Ohio, to make this happen. Let me first also extend my appreciation to Dr. Forward for making this an opportunity for us to speak. When I reached out to him around December, he assured me that he's for the ceasefire, because we were working with City of Dayton to ask for a ceasefire resolution. Dr. Forward here reached out to the National. Come find out that President of the National, Dr. Derek Johnson, issued one. I wish I needed to read his statement, but I think I will read it later. But you would feel good where he said, hate on anybody is hate on everybody. And it caused lots of hardship to everybody. And that came from the president of the NAACP, and we appreciate that. And Dr. Ford accepted the fact that he will also be willing to issue a similar statement calling for ceasefire. Thank you.
I'm Viola Westwood, and I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is here in Dayton, and on the second row over there, our state president for this entire Dayton and several places south of Dayton, like Kettering, Centerville, etc., is here. President Bright and Lisa, I'm going to lose my Matthews, who is my supervisor, as I am on the council for communication for our church. And my job is outreach, interfaith, and working on making these kind of connections and peaceful overtures while we are here in Dayton, doing what we can do locally. I would like to read a statement from our prophet, President Nelson, that was issued immediately after the unfortunate events. We are devastated by the recent eruption of violence and loss of life in the Middle East. Violence of this nature is abhorrent to us and is not in harmony with the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the gospel of peace. At such times, our hearts ache for all victims of this atrocity. As servants of God, we affirm that He calls upon all of us to love our neighbors as ourselves, and we pray for a peaceful resolution of all conflicts. And 6 months before, in April, our prophet had given a talk in a general meeting on peacemaking, and I think this is just what you were saying. Brothers and sisters, we can literally change the world, one person and one interaction at a time. How? By modeling how to manage honest differences of opinion with mutual respect and dignified dialogue. So that is my statement of who I am. Oh, I'm also the co-advisor for the with Mrs. Forward for the Thurgood Marshall Forward chapter.
Amen. Praise the Lord, somebody. I'm Reverend Dr. Rodney Carter, and serve as the senior pastor of the Zion Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio. I received a call from my good friend, Pastor Allen, this afternoon, asking me to sit in on behalf of one of my colleagues who could not make it. Amen. So I'm a pinch hitter, if you would say so. I was born and raised in Middletown, Ohio, a child of the 60s, direct descendants of slaves, sharecroppers, a child of the civil rights movement. So I've got intimate familiarity with disparity and discrimination and hatred. As my young friend down at the end said, this is not the Middle East, this is Dayton. I served as the president for Leaders for Equality and Action in Dayton. We were fighting across denominational lines with many of our colleagues of differing faiths for peace and resolution to problems throughout the city. I also served as the president of the Clergy Community Coalition as we fought the heinous closure and destruction of the Good Samaritan Hospital, some of you in this very room. What is happening not only in the United States but across the globe is a sad state of affairs as we continue to react violently to disagreements, placing women and children at harm's way. I want to just advocate for peace and a resolution of peace, that we might spare the violence. I know that fighting over in that region of the world has been going on for quite some time. It doesn't make it right. What we ought to do is be able to reason as men and women and come up with a solution to stop the violence, whether it be a ceasefire or whether it be just a cessation of the violence, period. And I'm committed to doing so even on tonight, sharing my ideas and views on how we can love one another and stop killing each other. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could you give all of our, would you give all of our panelists a hand? I want to thank President Ford for extending to me this opportunity and challenge to host such a rich dialogue, not only among the panelists, but ultimately with all of you who are here tonight that might contribute to the conversation and understanding as well. Having said that, I would like to read a quote by one of my heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which in doing so prompts me to ask that we would pray for Dr. King's family, as I was saddened to learn that his son Dexter King died today at 62 years old. So now only two of Dr. and Mrs. King's children remain alive on this side. Those two being Martin Luther King III and Yolanda King. And I was in Atlanta when she passed and went to her memorial service. And my heart has always gone out to those kids because of the enormous weight and burden of legacy that they grew up having to bear. And let us be prayerful for Bernice and Martin and the rest. Dr. King said on one day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but that it is a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. Mr. Yusuf, would you please share with us, starting with you and then moving on as we have, what is the Hamas-Israeli conflict in a nutshell? And we do mean nutshell.
I'm not the expert to speak about both Hamas or the Israeli, but I just want to say something that October 7th did not start this. And I hope that everybody deep down in their heart, regardless of what their opinions are, in January of this year, I actually wrote an op-ed just to write one for our asylum seekers south of the country, and I actually referenced our displaced Palestinian families that has been out of their homes. They don't have even a passport, they don't have even a citizenship all over the country. So this whole thing didn't start on October 7th, and I beg of you, whatever your beliefs are, please understand that. This conflict has been going on since actually World War I, to be exact, when Palestine was occupied by the Ottoman Empire. Well, the whole region, there was no Palestine that way. It was a whole thing back during the Ottoman Empire. It was referred to as the Arabian Peninsula or the Levant. But then little by little, the Ottoman Empire started disintegrating. They split the region into multiple countries. One of them became Palestine, Lebanon, Syria. I'm sorry?
Great Britain then.
Yes, so Great Britain was part of that whole thing. Regardless to say, Hamas didn't actually exist until about 16 years ago. So there was no Hamas until the siege. About 300 acres of land became what everybody kept referring to as an open air prison. So Hamas started as part of something that our country, the United States of America, was promoting, the Arab Spring. We all know about the Arab Spring. And it happened that Hamas won election. It's fair and square, but then that didn't they didn't enjoy that support. So Hamas and the Palestinian Authority were split. The Palestinian Authority came to represent the West Bank, and Hamas ruled the Gaza Strip. And then from there on, year after year after year, we hear about an invasion or two by the Israeli forces, claiming that there are tunnels under Gaza Strip and they are a threat to the security of Israel. Israel has the right to live in peace and security, but how often do we use the same reason over and over again that the tunnels down underneath Gaza Strip are the reason for an invasion, one after the other? Gaza Strip is bounded by a 30-foot concrete wall from all sides and the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, on the west side. And we still accept that. Our elected officials here are not helping that cause, because we believe strongly with the safety and security of Israel at the expense of every human being. They have the right to live in peace. But all what we're asking from our brothers and sisters in Israel and the United States, the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, to give the Palestinians a chance. They want to live in peace and harmony. They want to belong somewhere. They are stateless people, and yet they were called human animals. They were called human animals, and our elected officials in this country repeated that. They dehumanized every single constituent that we have here that belong to that part of the world. And that's what we really need to stop. Hamas, we're legitimizing them. We're calling this presentation the war between Hamas and Israel. We are legitimizing this group that we're saying they're a terrorist group, but yet we're publicizing it all over the place that the war is between Hamas and Israel. It's actually between the Palestinian people and Israel. They're defenseless. I will share statistics if I have a chance to get there, but for a scholar, I really appreciate Dr. Elliot Ratzman. He's a scholar of Jewish faith. I'm really happy that you're here. If you have any questions, please, he's going to hang out after the meeting and he can answer many of our questions as well. Thank you. Dr. Elliot Ratzman, he's from Earlham College. He came. Elliot Ratzman.
Dr. Alia Trotsman, would you mind raising your hand? All right. Would you mind joining this panel? I was just bold enough to ask you to come up here with us, because if you didn't come up here, we were just going to listen to you from the back. So we're very honored, sir, that you decided to invest time in joining us for this conversation on tonight. And you may also introduce yourself. Yusuf tagged you, so you're it. Help us to make sense of exactly what this what is the Hamas? No longer should we say is Hamas-Israeli conflict. I'm understanding we should say the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Is that correct, music?
It will be best.
Okay, noted. Doctor.
Sure. I'm Elliot Ratzman. I teach Jewish studies and Christian theology at Orland College. I'm a scholar of race, Judaism, the Arab-Israeli conflict. I don't represent any official part of the Jewish world and dating here. This is me. I'm also the acting chair of the Jewish Peace Fellowship, which is under the Fellowship of Reconciliation. So we're an anti-military, anti-conscription organization. So my what I say tonight is probably not representative, but I would like to represent some of the Jewish perspective on this. The Arab-Israeli conflict has a lot of causes. Big power politics, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Certainly European racism, certainly nationalism, Arab nationalism, Jewish nationalism, Palestinian nationalism. It's when the dust settles, it ends up with Israel holding most of the cards, the Palestinian people somewhat completely victimized by displacement. But also the Jewish people and the Israeli nation traumatized by the Holocaust, fearing another genocide for themselves over this last century, creating a garrison state militantly defensive of its own well-being. Hamas, which emerged in the 80s as a religious nationalist alternative to the secular left Palestinian nationalism, was a brutal opponent of the solution, which has been questioned here, which was a two-state solution, which is the international almost consensus of what should happen. The Palestinians were displaced in 1948 after a civil war and a regional war. Could have gone the other way very easily. In 1967, Israel also displaced a number of other populations of Palestinians. Hamas arose in part out of the agreements between the PLO, the secular Palestinians, and Israel. A complicated history which resulted in a lot of bombing of civilians within municipalities in Israel. So most Israelis understand Hamas through that lens, not as the representatives of suffering Palestinians, but as the instigators of bus bombings in the middle of Jerusalem, not attacking soldiers out in the desert as the old armies did, but of causing terror within the boundaries of Israel. Gaza has been an open wound, and we in the Israeli peace camp, we in the Jewish peace camp, have been not doing much because it wasn't clear what the resolution was. After a civil war between the PLO and Hamas took over the Gaza Strip with their stated genocidal intentions of driving Jews out of the Middle East, wanting to kill all Jews and targeting all over the world. And Israel, perhaps opportunistically, took them at their word and penned in the Palestinian population, many of whom, in fact, the majority of whom, did not vote for Hamas. Hamas did not win an outright majority, but PLO and its non-wisdom split their votes in 2006 or 7. So October 7th was not the beginning. Yes, the Palestinians have been sort of hamstrung, not working with... Israel has not worked well in creating Palestinian autonomy and independence and sovereignty. And that's certainly true. And the suffering of the people in Gaza over the last 16 or so years has been terrible. Some of my students come from Gaza, students in Earlham College, and they have stories, both living under Hamas and also living under Israeli domination. It's a complicated story here, right? Now, since October 7th, the American Jewish community and the Israeli community has been traumatized again for the first time. It's not just soldiers, but peaceniks, right, who were kibbutzim, filled with people who worked with the Gazans. Partygoers were killed, civilians. It was not targeting soldiers in the desert like the old army wars between states, but rather an attack on civilians. So, let me say, The vast majority of American Jews absolutely support this war against Hamas. Right? They support it because of the trauma. They support it because they see Israel as vulnerable. I'm not here to condemn that view. I think it's wrong, but I think it's understandable. And so generosity has to be given. At the same time, we who are opposed to Israel's war against the civilian population in Gaza. I've worked for ceasefire in my private capacity, but I think it's understandable that the American Jewish community, who share our values of peace-loving, anti-racism, of equality, are sort of arrested at this moment and not seeing clearly the devastation. So let me wrap this up, because you said a nutshell, and I just said 4 nutshells, is that I support a ceasefire and I support a cessation of military actions and a political solution. Not because I hate Israel. Contrary, I am a Zionist and I love Israel. And just like King, who I taught this morning, my first class, in Time to Break Silence, April 4th, 1967, Riverside Church, came out against the Vietnam War. He did not say I come out against the Vietnam War because I hate America. He says I love America, and I want America to stand up to its principles. So as a Zionist, I say, what is best in the Jewish National Project demands that we have coexistence with the Palestinian people, that we reconcile with the Palestinian people, and that we find another way to deal with the, I would say, genocidal terrorist group Hamas, because we cannot spare. I mean, how much is our freedom worth when right now something like 15,000 women and children have been killed in those bombings on the way to get the Hamas militants? How many Hamas militants have been killed? 7,000, I think, is the number. How many Hamas militants are there? They say 30,000. So how many more dozen thousand Palestinian civilians are we going to kill in order to get the last Hamas militant? As somebody who loves Israel, I say this is wrong and unjust. Now, those of you who love peace, those of you who pursue justice, I think we both have to have grace towards the Jewish population in their confusion, right? There's some haters there, but for the most part, they also do not want civilians killed. And we have to take concrete steps to work to rein in Israel's worst tendencies as a state. I think that's a reasonable position, somebody who loves Israel and wants to see justice done for the Israeli people and also the Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We appreciate that. Is it an oversimplification to perceive that this conflict is ultimately rooted in a sort of land tug-of-war? Is land involved in this? Is it states' rights, states' ownership? Am I hearing that correctly? That the Palestinians have been denied states' rights, to use a very perhaps Western civilization term. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, this is largely about land and power.
So it's about land.
But it's also about, in some ways, the Arab world had said at some point, we are all one national group. And so Israel said, okay, well, if you're one national group, why don't you Palestinians go over to Jordan or go over here? And that's disingenuous and a sad story. It is about that, but it's also about, there's a religious dimension here. Religion is an accelerant, we all know that. It's an accelerant to nationalism. There's Jewish nationalists who are in the government. Youssef quoted one or two, saying terrible things about the Palestinians, wipe them all off the map, and they're all animals. So there's a religious nationalism in Israel. They're the minority, but they're in power. In the United States, there's not many super high state Jewish religious nationalists. Hamas is a religious nationalist group. It's well organized. In another time period, it might have been a more secular group, but it is the one that is attracting the charm of resistance, armed resistance, violence resistance. And so it is popular. And it's effective. And maybe many of you believe that, for example, during slave revolts, civilians were justified in being killed, say in some of the slave revolts in the South. But the slave revolts would not kill Quaker communities who were actually abolitionists. And what happened in Israel was like you had peacenik communities targeted by Hamas on October 7th. And that really smarts. And I should say, I know a lot of people whose family members and comrades and colleagues were killed on October 7th. Not one person I know in Israel, and I know a lot of people in Israel, was left unscathed. Academic community was devastated, losses of our colleagues. And every one of my Palestinian students has had family members killed in the bombings. Every one of my Palestinian students. Some whose whole lives have been destroyed. And so this tragedy is not just an act of nature. It is something that we in America have an opportunity to push the brakes on. And I think that's where we need practically to go from here.
One more thing, Professor, and then we shall pass the mic to Vilo and Pastor Carter. What is the heart of the religious claim over which they're fighting?
I'll give you one foot for 30 seconds. Religions are shaped and distorted and mutated by power. We all know this. Christianity becomes Constantinian Christianity, right? It becomes empire after a certain point, right? Hamas is a form of Islam shaped by nationalism and shaped by traditions of violent struggle against occupiers. But religion is an accelerator. It also bonds people together. Jewish nationalism. Let me say, Jews were pacifists for 2,000 years until Zionism. Right? And once Jews have land and an army, and once they got hold of the holy sites that they wanted sovereignty over, you're seeing a kind of perversion of that Jewish peace tradition. So religion is an accelerant. In Israel, it is the Jewish religious right controls a lot of power, holds the strings of the government. In Palestine, it is the Islamic religious right, you might say, that represents the militant, muscular, armed struggle against Israel, and that's dangerous. We need a nonviolent social democratic movement of Israelis and Palestinians to, I believe, take us out of this problem. I don't see it coming. But religion is something that unifies, binds, and distorts, in which you justify your violence in the name of God. I think we all here would disagree with that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Viola Westwood, as a representative of the Church of Latter-day Saints, what is your perspective on all that has been shared, or what you have observed in the conflict?
Boy, there's a lot to think about here, and I think that however just your cause is, anyone who crosses into that kind of othering language where you're calling anybody vermin, or that they need to be wiped off the face of the earth, or should no longer exist, which has been, both sides have engaged in that, and we've heard it in the United States on several different fault lines in our country. So since we are here in Dayton, let us not just judge what is happening in Israel, but really look at ourselves as well. Anytime we are not acknowledging the full humanity of other people, we are going to go into violence rather than peace. Because we have to have that appreciation for the divinity of each human being on this planet. And if we can start with that understanding and see the light of God, whatever name He is called, in every person, then we can work together for peace. Now, my next example is not from my religion, but from my husband who teaches chess. And he works with middle schoolers. And, in the beginning, they're so excited about their strategy and their plan to win the game that they forget to notice that the other side has a strategy and a plan. And I think, again, in any peacemaking, we need to be very aware of what the other group's goals, fears, desires are, not just our own. We have to be able to look through a multiplicity of lenses, at least, and we may not, as you say, agree with everything that we look through, but we need to acknowledge their viewpoint and try to see where they're coming from. So I think that's really important. The other thing I just want to mention is we talked about governments when they get in this very, I'll call it authoritarian mode of, I am the leader, I know best, we will do it this way. And often they talk a lot about peace and security. But if you notice in Israel, they talked about how safe they were making the country. But in actuality, there's a frontline PBS program on this if you want to see. They had not updated their security systems. Cameras on that big wall that was supposed to be so safe were years out of date. And ordinary soldiers had been complaining for years that they were not working properly. So the government of Israel, although they were speaking in a very no peace mode, they were not doing the nuts and bolts of security. And this story might have a very different outcome if they had paid attention to it. Now, we can undoubtedly point to problems with everybody there, but I just want us to realize that just because a powerful leader is talking big guns and hawks and all that, they may not be doing the nuts and bolts to really keep things safe. Thank you.
Pastor Carter, as the mic comes your way, listening to all of this, revealing insight into this conflict between Palestine and Israel, and particularly what the professor brought into the conversation. One of the challenges I have, Pastor, as a representative of the Christian community, is sometimes people associating following Jesus with absolute pacifism, that war is somehow anti-Christ, and certainly it can't be argued that war is anti-biblical because the Old Testament is filled with war. And so, in the words of Dr. Garner Taylor, I wouldn't be what you call an absolute pacifist. Practically speaking, ideally I would be, but practically speaking, I wouldn't be a pacifist as a Christian minister because I believe the Civil War needed and should have been fought. If the Civil War wasn't fought, then I'm not sitting here in this place like this tonight with my humanity fully recognized. And so I'm not a practical, pure pacifist. Pastor Carter, could you shed light on how are we able, therefore, to surmise what is the difference between a just war and an unjust war, assuming that you subscribe to that notion? I know Dr. King, though he is considered a pacifist, did talk about unjust laws versus just laws. But for me, again, as a Christian minister, I see it, my concern is a war just or is it unjust? And give you just another 15 seconds to gather your thoughts. There was something I heard from the Zionist professor that I appreciated. He said that that is in alignment with what I'm articulating. You said that when Israel attacked Hamas attacked, you said that it wasn't done out in the desert place where wars are usually fought, but it was done in the pedestrian places, in the common places where the citizenry are supposed to be left to live in peace, which to me just kind of drew a line of demarcation that it's not necessarily war that has to be the problem, but how war is done and for what reason war is done has to be considered. Okay, Pastor, help us out, or maybe help me out.
I am by no means an expert as a practicing pastor and an attorney. I want to thank the professor there for helping me frame this, because the land grab that happened at the conclusion of the Second World War, where the Russians were grabbing up everything that they could and they were weaponizing whomever they could, and the United States had to counter that. As I studied the FBI, I studied the CIA, they had to counter that with weapons to not only create instability in governments, but also to secure what they thought was democracy across the miles from people who might not even want democracy. And to that end, the sad part for me is Martin Luther King said this, Doctor, at the assassination of Malcolm X. It's quite evident that we don't know how to be disagreeable without still being violently disagreeable. No concern about the loss of life or life itself. And when I studied some of that stuff today after I spoke to you, it's quite clear that there are different ideologies here, not only religious, but social and political at play here. And it's quite sad that both sides are speaking in terms of utterly destroying the other side with no thought of life, no value of human life. And the sad part is that as I read, I don't know how accurate the number was, but that in our history of the country, the United States of America, we've given aid to the Israeli government in huge numbers. The number was $158 billion, I believe.
Every year.
I mean, I'm just, it's an astronomical number. Yeah, not only just humanitarian, not just medical, not just food, but military.
Yeah.
And when you have that type of military capability, you get kind of arrogant with it. And again, when I studied Hamas, the mantra for Hamas was to destroy the Jewish state at any cost. And it's the prophet Micah was saying, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. And some of the things that I had to do when I lived in Los Angeles in the courtroom was to participate in what we call good faith settlements. That means that you have to sit down and reason and bring a stop to the lunacy without having to try to prove a point that you are militarily superior to a certain group of people that you are militarily superior to. It's like a grown man beating up a 3-year-old. And I just, it's nothing new. It's been all in the Bible. Pastor, you said it's in the Old Testament, but the callousness that we as human beings are displaying now is quite sad, and it causes us to have to re-examine ourselves here in Dayton to see how we might suggest some alternatives, get some real traction on how we might not only start talking about peace, but to try to implement peace through humanitarian measures that value human life. It bothers me when innocent women or children are just collateral damage, and you can just kill randomly like that. I just think that the leaders in this room, I think it's a great challenge for us, but it provides us with a great opportunity for us to sit down and reason together with what my Lord and Savior said, which was love. It's the love of Jesus Christ. It's love that will take us where we need to be because Christ loved us so much that he came and he died for us. And so I would like to see us have a discussion about how we can collaborate one with the other. I want to again thank you, Doctor. I want to thank Dr. Forward for this very important discussion, which is just the starting point. I mean, I've been in these meetings before across denominational lines, across faiths, where, you know, we have to sit and talk about these things, and we have to have compassion one for the other in our suggesting ways that we can help deter further violence and further bloodshed.
Yeah, I think that is remarkable, and it was that is a perfect segue into the next stage of our conversation. And as we go into that, I'd like to encourage everyone who has a comment or a question to please prepare yourselves so that we can bring your voice, your wisdom, your perspective, your insight into this rich dialogue. It was a perfect segue that you provided us when you mentioned from your legal background, good faith settlements, and how you utilize that in working between opposing parties, working with opposing parties in the American judicial system, which directs us back to the professor. What is a pathway to peace as you see it that we can participate in? A lot of times we have these conversations. It's good for insight, understanding, knowledge, information, but I know for myself, I walk away saying, what do I do with it? How do I lead my congregation? How do I leverage my influence to be a part of the solution and not the problem? And let me just also throw this out at the risk of being controversial. I'm probably considered one of the most controversial people in the Baptist community here, and I'm quite comfortable with it. But there is a very strange relationship in America between the Jewish community and the Black community. And sometimes it's very concerning to me and to people in the Black community, the level of attention that is bestowed by the media on Israeli and Jewish involved matters. And here we are as Black people right here in America, and we haven't received reparations. They just eliminated affirmative action. So I just want to put in this space, and even if Black people don't say amen, I don't mind being controversial. I'm going to say amen. That one of the reasons it's hard for Black people, I think, to tie into this discussion beyond information is because sometimes when we hear about how much attention this receives, it's a contrast of how much attention our issues haven't received, don't receive. So that's concerning to me.
Well, the first thing I want to say is white supremacy pits minorities against each other.
That's right. That's right.
I'll say it again. White supremacy pits minorities against each other.
That's right.
And so when we look at the structural preference towards the state of Israel, we can't just say, oh, this is a Jewish community. Who is the biggest supporters of the state of Israel? It's white evangelicals. And so you have Christian Zionism, the most militarist and lack of Jewish values group, supporting the settlement project in the West Bank. Most American Jews don't do that. Most American Jews are liberal and don't understand that West Bank settlement project. So we have to be aware that we cannot see the support of the United States militarily for the state of Israel and the settlement projects as a emerging out of the Jewish community. So there's this Christian Zionist part, so I would say that. The second is, the American Jewish community sees itself, perhaps too rosily, obviously, as an anti-racist community. And that they should be held to account for that and say, okay, well, we have to be louder about Islamophobia. We have to be louder about police brutality. We have to be louder about the prison industrial complex. So you have allies there ready to dialogue. And I think it's important to take that up. There's no other white community, except for maybe the peace churches, that see themselves as dedicated to anti-racism as much as the Jewish community, however imperfect the Jewish community is. So start there, work out of coalition. What are we advocating? There's already a solution. It's called the two-state solution. It was started in Oslo. The right wing in Israel hamstrung. They assassinated a Jewish prime minister who was a warrior. And we cannot deviate from that. It's already in a consensus. The settlement project in the West Bank is trying to foil that. So if you want, on a structural level, to see peace between Israelis and Palestinians, the Jews are not going anywhere. There's no Poland for them to go back to. They see themselves as part of that land, rightly or wrongly. The Palestinians have been done a terrible turn, a number of terrible turns over the decades, but like other post-conflict societies, including other settler colonial societies, there will be eventually a modus vivendi and perhaps a reconciliation. So we have to keep the long view in mind. But what you can do, first of all, as Christians, not accept, we call it Bogomaisis, that God promised the land to the Jews. I hear that a lot, right? According to Rabbinic Judaism, Jews are in exile for a reason. Now, Zionism was seen by some of the Jewish communities as a heresy. But nevertheless, it's a reality. So Jewish religion is not, oh, God gave us this land, end of story. But on the other side, we also have to acknowledge that there is a complex power dynamic. Jews see themselves as a very small little part of the larger hostile Middle East. And so they feel insecure and they feel besieged. Rightly or wrongly, that has to be attended to. The Palestinians and the Israelis, I pray, because we are cousins, we are part of the same fabric of that region. I lived in Jerusalem for several years. Will come to a reconciliation and hopefully a sense of forgiveness. But right now, the Israelis are very sore. Their people have been decimated brutally. Hostages are still being held hostage. The Palestinians are witnessing the devastation and the fear of another catastrophe, another monster. And that has to be attended to. So what we as Americans should do, we should advocate for sane policy towards the Middle East. Right? We should advocate for sane policies for the Middle East and make it part of our basket of assumptions. But not to demonize the Palestinians and not to demonize the Jewish communities, to understand them and to work them. And I work with the Quakers, the FCNL. We're working on national legislation. I would encourage your churches and your congregations, your mosques, to become part of that effort. And that's we will have maybe some peace.
Thank you. So you said advocate for sane policies towards the Middle East. Very good. If you could do that 30-second nutshell just one more time for me. You did it the first time. If you could PS for me on this real quick. What is the, I want to make sure that we're not taking for granted everybody's understanding level, of which mine is low in this area. What is the difference between Zionism and, because you just said Judaism and Zionism, so just what's the difference in 30 seconds?
Sure. I think somebody, did you refer to me as a Zionist professor? Like that's the first time that's happened.
I thought you referred to yourself as a
No, I say I'm a Zionist. I also say I'm a socialist. So I'd rather you call me a socialist professor. Okay. So Zionism is the Jewish national movement. It has come to be demonized as a term for uncritical support of the state of Israel. And that's wrong. Most American Jews are at least some level of supporting the state of Israel. All right? And I think we have to have some generosity and grace, is that even my parents, who don't know anything about this conflict, still feel sympathy towards the cause of the state of Israel. So being a Zionist, I see that as I have a very funky left-wing Zionist tradition I come out of. What passes for the policies of the state of Israel need to be called out for what they are, right? And not given extraordinary labels. My slogan is, the state of Israel is terrible for my Zionism. My Zionism is a binational Zionism, Palestinians and Jews living in the Holy Land peacefully. Right? But Zionism has become a term of disparagement, and it means roughly, for your average person, sort of uncritical support for genocide of Palestinians or support of the state of Israel. For American Jews, to say that they are Zionists mean they have some little support or great support for the state of Israel. And that's the vast majority of American Jews. So we have to be careful with that.
Very good. We'll talk offline about the notion of the promise of the land to Israel. I'm going through the Bible in 1 year with my congregation, and we're just in Exodus. So it certainly seems that we're studying what I guess would be the biblical Torah-based basis of that line of thought. So it'd be interesting to know why you recommend not to view it that way. Yusuf. Also, before you speak, will all persons who have questions or comments please line up to my right, so that once our panelists have shared their thoughts on what we can do, we can hear from you. Thank you very much.